it means that we are to abstain from food, all food. We are to have no more than one meal tomorrow, or 2 smaller meals that would not add up to one larger meal, if our health and age permit us. This is obligatory for those who are 14 to 62, if I'm not mistaken. If you have health concerns, like you're diabetic or you need to take your medication with food, there are dispense for that. But as much as you are able to, you are to observe the fast for tomorrow as we begin our 40 days journey walking with Jesus. What else happens during Lent? What happens on the Fridays? We are to abstain from meat on all Fridays of Lent. What about the rest of the year?
Technically, yes.
Friday.
Technically, yes. We are to also abstain from meat on Fridays. If you don't want to do that, you are obliged to do some other act of penance on all Fridays of the year. This is one of those misinformation things that have come down. Oh, Vatican II got rid of us not eating meat on Fridays anymore.
Nope.
Well, yes and no. No, in the sense that we are not to do any penances, but yes, they said we no longer were obliged to do it during this year, during the rest of the year. But the injunction, or if you will, the rule to observe all Fridays of the year as if they were mini Good Fridays is something that we are to do all during the year. If that means not eating meat on Fridays and having fish, well then so be it. If that means you do extra prayer on that time, so instead of 1 rosary you do 2, then so be it. Oh, don't tell me I ran out of power. No, come back. No, I'm melting. What a world. Oh well, it looks like I'm out for today. Sorry, gave up the ghost. No. So, you don't happen to have a battery I can plug into this, no? All right.
Chip, I have a battery pack in my car, and an adapter. I don't know if it will fit or not. You want me to go check?
Oh, you can check, yeah. Let me see if I can get any power, because usually it gives me more than a 5-minute warning before it turns off. Oh, drat. Oh well. Well, we'll work around it. That's life. That's life. That's what I would tell my students at this point. That's life. We work around it.
Chip. So we're not, I mean, it's a definite rule, because I'm not aware of it, that we do not eat meat on Friday during Lent?
Yes, that never changed. For Lent, you are to abstain from meat on Friday as a form of corporal penance.
Well, I grew up that way,
Uh-huh.
and then I guess you say Vatican II did away with it.
It did, but it didn't. It did in the sense that the bishops of the United States, what happened was the bishops of the United States petitioned the Holy See for something that's called an indult. And the indult says that it lifted the obligation to not eat meat on Fridays during the rest of the year. And the Holy See granted the indult. But what that meant was you're no longer obliged to only abstain from meat on Fridays. What it didn't do is say you don't do anything on Fridays as a form of penance. You can continue the practice of not eating meat on Friday. That's a form of penance. Or you can do something else. But the point is that you make every Friday of the year a reflection of what Jesus did for us on Good Friday. You find some way of making some act of penance. Like I said, if you normally pray 1 rosary during the day, you pray 2 on Fridays instead, and you can have your ham sandwich. Okay? So the idea is that you do some extra form of penance on Fridays. And you do this on a regular basis. During Lent, though, the church kept the no meat on Friday rule in perpetuity. Interestingly enough, during the Lenten season prior to Vatican II, Wednesdays were also a no meat, were an abstinence day as well. Nowadays, what happens is, let me see if it'll work. You never know. Because I'm thinking it would have to plug in order for it to work.
I don't think that's
I don't think it's so good.
Nope. Nope. Oh, well, it was a good try. Thank you. Never know until you try. Thanks. Well, I can turn this off. So it stopped blowing hot air. So that is the purpose of it. That's what the church is requiring us to do. Nowadays, on Wednesdays, you have what's called Soup Day. You tend to eat soup on Wednesdays as kind of a form of penance on that day. It's not quite the same, but it's similar in that respect. That's what's happening right now. So tomorrow's a day of fasting and abstinence. So fasting, only 1 meal, or 2 smaller meals that would add up to 1 meal, and to abstain from meat as well. Then the other time that this happens is when? Good Friday, which is basically the end of Lent. Technically Easter is, but really Good Friday is. That is also another day of fasting and abstinence that the church requires all the faithful to do. By the way, these are the only 2 required days that the church obliges us to fast on. As a matter of rule, we should have the practice of fasting and abstinence, of prayer and almsgiving as a regular form of our penitential life. So that is something that it should be part and parcel of our practice as Catholics, to live a penitent life. So be that as it may. So that's what's happening. The practice of, quote, giving up something during Lent is also a means of penance, that we follow Jesus during this 40 days, where he did not eat for 40 days and 40 nights. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights while he was in the desert. Prior to what? He did this, and then he did what? What happened after this? He what? I'm sorry, what? What did? He proclaimed the kingdom, yes. He started his ministry. It was after his baptism, he went into the desert, fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and then came out of the desert and he began his ministry. So this was in preparation for him to start his preaching and his teaching ministry, which would last approximately 3.5 years. And then he died, and then he rose again. So the church's practice of this, following Jesus in his death and resurrection, includes us going into the desert with him in preparation for what? For our ministry. What ministry? I'm not a churchman. No, but we are asked to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. Because what happens at the end of Lent? What do we celebrate? Easter. That's what we need to tell people about. Easter, the fact of the resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the most profound historical event of human history. The most profound historical event of human history. And I think we underestimated, underrepresented. I think, especially we as Catholic Christians, we think about it in our rosary, you know, the resurrection of Jesus, and we move on. We don't realize what a huge impact this event has had on world history. I mean, it completely transformed world history. We went from a predominantly pagan culture, universally, to now, where the belief in one God is fairly universal. One God, not multiple gods. You realize that at the time of Jesus, he was surrounded by a culture that believed in multiple gods. That was just common. The Romans had their gods, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Pluto, Mercury, all of those gods. The Egyptians had their gods, Isis, Osiris, Ammon, Ptah, Hathor. The Persians had their gods, Mithra, and so forth. I mean, the whole universe, everything around him was surrounded by pagan deities. This was just commonplace. The people who were outside of that were Jews. The Jews had this funny belief in one God. And it was so funny that they couldn't even have a statue to him because he had no face. He was an invisible God, but he was one. There was only one God. Now, in all fairness, the Greek philosophers had come up with the idea of one God. But this was not a popular notion. Not everyone even thought about that. Popular notion was all of the local divinities that were all over the Mediterranean realm. I mean, gods were a dime a dozen. You understand that? So, the idea that Jesus comes up in this environment and says, I am the Son of God. I am God in human flesh. Well, the first reaction is to say, what? Right? That's the first reaction, isn't it?
Where's the YouTube video?
Yeah, where's the YouTube video? And then what would you want to see if someone said that?
A miracle.
Proof, right? Something, right? Your God, do something. Right? That seems fair, right? And did he?
Yes.
Yes. Many miracles. In fact, the Gospel of John records 7 specific miracles that showed Jesus' glory. He said these were the signs of glory that pointed to his credentials. What were they? Well, let me see if I can remember them now. Thank you for putting me on the spot. This is what happens when I don't do my Noah story because everything shuts down. That's what happens when you're too dependent on technology. But the first one was the turning water into wine. That was the first one. The second one was the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. That lasted for well over a year. People were still talking about that one miracle for a year later. Okay?
I'm sorry, which one?
The miracle of the curing of the man at the pool of Bethesda.
Was that the blind?
No. He was paralyzed for 38 years. The other one was the feeding of the 5,000.
I have all 35 listed. Do you want to?
Oh, go for it. Tell me.
I'll let you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. These are all of his general miracles. Yes. Let me see if I can narrow them down. Made water into wine, healing of the nobleman's son, the paralytic, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on water, healing the man born blind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 was the raising of Lazarus and his resurrection, his own resurrection. That's the 7 miracles that Jesus did in the Gospel of John that pointed to his divinity.
Who was the healing of the nobleman's son?
That was, I believe, chapter 4.
Sorry, I'm still worrying. Or the centurion?
No, not the centurion. Then he returned to Cana in Galilee, where he had made water into wine. Now there was a royal official whose son was ill in Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and asked him to heal his son. Jesus said, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe." And he kept pressing him, "Sir, come before my child dies." He said, "You may go, your child will live." And the man believed what Jesus said. Verse 54, this was the second sign Jesus did when he came to Galilee. So it says in the gospel this was his second sign that he did after he turned water into wine. He healed this nobleman's son. Okay? So let me give those to you again. Making water into wine, the healing of the nobleman's son, the man at the pool of Bethesda, feeding of the 5,000, Jesus walking on water, the curing of the man born blind, and the raising of Lazarus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I'm sorry, those were the 7. Those were the 7. So I miscounted the first time. Others include the raising of himself from the dead. I know